Welcome to this special edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. In the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, hundreds of thousands of people around our region are out of work. That's affecting if they can pay rent or not. So this week, we're taking a special look at the impact of a moratorium on residential evictions, now in place at the state and local level. How will this affect renters? How will this affect landlords? And what happens when the moratorium is over? We have two guests who are going to help us answer these questions. They are joining us remotely. On the phone is Edmund Witter. He is a senior managing attorney who oversees the Housing Justice Project for the King County Bar Association, representing renters and their rights. We also have with us Brett Waller. He is director of government affairs for the Washington Multifamily Housing Association, representing property owners and managers. Thank you both for joining us. And Edmund, I want to start with you here. We have a state moratorium on evictions in place right now, announced by the governor. It runs through mid-April as of right now. It's likely to be extended. We also have a City of Seattle moratorium on evictions that runs through mid-May. The council wants to extend that for 6 months after the state of emergency. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But basically, bottom line here, different cities have different rules in place. I want to be clear, though, from the very, very start. An eviction moratorium does not mean people should stop paying rent. How are you advising tenants on this?
Yeah, and that's absolutely the most important thing to understand about this. And we get a lot of calls from tenants asking, do I have to pay rent? My landlord's asking me when I'm going to pay my rent. I understand I don't have to pay my rent. But the first thing we have to clarify to that tenant is, no, you still do have an obligation to pay rent. There's nothing either at the federal, state, or local level that prohibits the landlord from eventually collecting rent from you. So it's really important at this time for the tenant to be working with the landlord, not using this as an excuse, not necessarily walking away from this responsibility, or what they have to do is talk to the landlord, still work with your landlord. This is giving you some breathing room, so you're not going to be evicted at this time if you don't pay your rent. But eventually, there's going to be a point where we're all going to be having to, as renters or any renter who's dealing with this issue right now, is going to have to eventually figure out when are they going to be able to pay the rent.
Yeah.
I suggest talking to landlords right now about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Brett, let's talk about your association. You oversee generally these 50-unit plus apartment complexes, 250,000 units across the state, part of your association. But you're talking to a lot of our larger landlords. I want to try to talk about them and our smaller landlords, too, because both of them are very concerned about this moratorium, how this works. These rents are very much something they rely on to pay their mortgages. What are you saying to landlords about this situation?
Yeah, we've, similar to what Ed said, is, making sure that the communication is the first and most important piece, making sure that you're communicating with your residents, providing them with available options that exist for those that have been affected by COVID, and making sure that they understand that the rent, in the most compassionate and nice way, that rent remains due. But we're here for you. We're here to work with you to make sure that we can help you through this time as much as we all continue to adjust to this new normal that we've got.
Yeah. And Brett, let me stick with you here. Should tenants be working out some sort of payment plan with their landlords, some sort of agreement to say, I'm going to pay you this much this month and this much next month? Is that a good idea?
I believe so. I mean, certainly there is some uncertainty about how long this is going to last and the lasting effect of this, but engaging with your landlord and paying some of your rent now and communicating about your needs, as well as making sure that the burden is shifted across multiple months, if that's what's required and needed, is going to be important. The landlord still has cost associated with maintaining that property, everything from the mortgage to the on-site employees, taxes, and those kinds of things that still need to be paid. Whether or not those taxes come due now or later, they still have to be paid. And the mortgage, of course, we all know there's limited mortgage forbearance right now.
Right. Well, Edmund, let me get your opinion on this, your thoughts about it, and maybe a legal perspective, too. Setting up a payment plan with the landlord, is that something you should do? Put it in writing? What are your thoughts about this?
The lawyer in me hesitates to advise somebody to necessarily do a concrete payment plan where potentially there might be ramifications if the tenant can't comply with it right now. I mean, I definitely agree with Brett that, communication is the most important thing, and any tenant who can pay something right now, who can work with their landlord, should really be doing so. But I've also seen some installment plans that have been offered by management companies that are terrible, frankly, for the tenant. First of all, they kind of put the tenant in a really tight installment plan that when I actually ask the tenant, can you actually do this? Do you think you're going to be able to do this? The answer is usually, I'm really uncertain about what my job prospects are. I'm uncertain about how long I'm going to have income. I don't know if I can do this. And then sometimes they'll even have clauses that say you have to give up your stimulus check when it comes in, make it go right to the landlord, or there's other sort of like waivers of certain rights that you might have once even the eviction moratorium lifts. So there is some things to be on the lookout for. I definitely think that you should be working with your landlord. You should be paying what you can, but everyone's situation is a little bit different right now, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. So don't necessarily put everything in writing so that you're going to eventually regret it later, but definitely work with the landlord to the extent you can.
Brett, I feel like I should bring you back in here. Any thoughts about what Edmund just said?
I have to agree with Edmund. I mean, you've got to read the documents that are provided to you. I certainly believe that the income that folks are receiving, whether that's through unemployment or a stimulus check, should be used to pay the rent, but it also should be available to pay for the other necessities of life, food and other needs associated with folks. To the extent that we don't know how long this is going to last, we're encouraging our members to be flexible in that prospect. Some folks may be able to go back to work immediately in May, while others may not. And even then, they can go back to work, and the economic outlook of the business in which they work at may not be the same for the next few months until we can kind of return to where we were before.
Yeah, here's hoping, and that could be a ways away. That's a good point. Edmund, I'll switch gears a little bit here. The Seattle City Council is looking at some legislation here in April to consider extending this eviction moratorium for 6 months after the end of this state of emergency. They're also considering a plan where renters could pay their back rent over the course of a full year. Do you support these proposals?
Yeah, I mean, we very much do. I mean, we think that it's really hard to say what's going to happen once this moratorium lifts. I think we do need a lot of breathing room right now to be able to even get in order what we need. I mean, the first thing that I think we definitely need is rental assistance. We need money to be able to help those renters who are about to fall behind. We need that money to also get back over to their landlords as well. Okay. But in the event we don't get that money, we definitely need that kind of support and some plan to be able to deal with all the tenants who are going to be facing eviction down the road.
Yeah. Brett, let me bring you in here. Your thoughts about extending this eviction moratorium for 6 months here in Seattle, allowing renters to pay that back rent over 12 months. Would you support that kind of legislation?
We're certainly encouraging our members to engage with their residents, communicate with the residents, and offer payment plans that fit the needs of both the resident and the housing provider. Our concerns lie in the fact that not, as Edmund said, not every housing provider has the same situation, and not every tenant has the same situation, and so we want to make sure that the needs of everyone are being met by any laws that are being considered. Okay. In terms of the eviction moratorium, there certainly is a need to have help for folks that are economically and financially affected by COVID. But we also have to make sure that the communities remain safe and that the actions of residents are not affecting the health and safety of the other residents or the employees that are in the on-site communities. And so we really need to balance the needs of everyone as we consider these laws and make sure that we're continuing to maintain and increase the supply of housing in Washington State. We already know that we're underproducing housing units, whatever type of housing units those are, and that's creating a housing demand that's out of balance with the need for the folks that live here.
Got it. I'll push this a little bit further, and Edmund, maybe talk to you about this. When you mentioned that whole rental assistance concept, you wrote recently in Crosscut about this idea of a statewide rent relief sort of program set up to reduce the rent burden on families and also try to ensure landlords are compensated fairly. I know New York City has a similar program to this. What would that look like? Why are you promoting this? Let's talk about that.
Well, we recently got a request from Senator Murray's office about how much it would cost to be able to even get tenants through the month of May at this point. Even doing some back of the envelope math based on the unemployment numbers, the average rent, I mean, we concluded it was almost $900 million. I mean, this is a huge potentially crash that we're going to see.
Yeah.
And that has a big ripple effect. So I think we need to start coming up with a huge plan. And it's not just a short-term one, but how are we going to keep people housed during this time? How are we going to keep money keep circulating within the rental market to make sure that everyone's going to be able to meet their costs, that landlords will be able to make their mortgage payments, and everybody else who depends on that, on the financial sector, as well as getting the money circulated. So that program is also just a way to sort of let's start talking about the new reality. What's the new rents that we're going to be able to charge? How are we going to keep people housed who maybe don't have the same access to income? And how do we make sure that we don't have an even worse homelessness crisis that we currently have? That's one solution that's, I think, worked in the past, and I think it's one that we should really embrace and talk about.
Yeah, it's taken it next level here for sure. And Brett, I'll bring you in here, this idea of a rent relief program of sorts. It sounds like maybe landlords could get some relief from this as well. Any thoughts about this concept of rent relief?
Well, we're very supportive of rental assistance programs. They're very successful in keeping people housed, as we can see from the Seattle Housing Levy. Folks who received about $1,700 in rental assistance in 2018 were 95% successful in remaining in their housing 1 year later. Rental assistance takes the burden off the tenant from having to make payments in a payment plan. It also helps the landlord provide the housing and maintain that housing that they need to pay those costs that continue to incur while the tenant may be experiencing some financial difficulties. So, we're very supportive of these rental assistance programs. We know that the need is extremely great, and there's work being done at the federal level and at the state level to understand what opportunities might be available to provide rental assistance. Representative Danny Heck from the South Sound has a bill in Congress that would allocate $100 billion to rental assistance. That's certainly a start, but as Edmund said, the need is so great. In my back of the napkin math, I was seeing about $400 million based upon the folks who had applied for unemployment in the 3 weeks preceding this past week. And so the need is really great, and that's going to be the best and most successful way of maintaining the housing opportunities that currently exist, and making sure that folks are not financially burdened with a payment plan throughout the next 6 months or however long what that looks like going forward for them.
And we need to wrap up the show in a little bit less than a minute here. I should point out to folks, we will have some information linked to this show for the Housing Justice Project, also the Multifamily Housing Association. So make sure you check out those resources. But maybe, Edmund, I can start with you. Final words towards lawmakers who are working on this issue in the months ahead, and maybe some renters out there. Please keep it to 20 seconds if you can.
Well, first of all, we need to invest in the rental assistance programs to be able to help everyone out right now. There's a lot of people impacted. And then secondly, we need to make sure we keep the breathing room available for those who are most in need of it. And so to keep up the work and just focus on those two things right now, I think that's how we get over this, at least the initial hump.
All right, Brett, 20-second version if you could.
I'm going to stick with somewhat of what Edmund said and say, we definitely need to invest in these rental assistance programs and make sure that there is sufficient capital available to assist everyone that needs the help right now. I think the second piece is remaining flexible. These are changing times. Things are changing every day, and tenants' needs are changing, and we need to remain flexible and not enact strict policies that will actually work to the detriment of helping those that need the most help right now.
All right. Thank you both very much for joining me. Thanks to everyone for watching on Seattle Channel. During this challenge of coronavirus, so crucial to be informed about the different things that are happening in our society right now. I'm Brian Callanan. Thanks for joining us on City Inside Out.